Hi, I'm Sergeant Phil Haller, and I'm here to talk to you today regarding the Phoenix Officers on Call project. This was a cumulative effort and involved myself, the commander from the Black Mountain Precinct, as well as the shift commander from the Black Mountain Precinct, and officers from the Black Mountain Precinct. We formed a committee called the Calls of Service Committee in order to address the response times to Priority 1 radio calls within the city of Phoenix, and specifically within the Black Mountain Precinct. We came to find out after reviewing the issues that the Black Mountain Precinct had the largest average response time for Priority 1 traffic, with an average response time of over 6 minutes. As you all know, the Phoenix Police Department has maintained a standard response time and requires all its officers to respond to Priority 1 traffic, and our goal is to be under 5 minutes. And we've been there for the last 15 years. This is the first year we've actually had a precinct that's been over 6 minutes in response time in the last 15 years. I think everybody here knows that we've had a large number of vacant positions in patrol due to the hiring freeze we've been under for the last 5 years. Although we've begun hiring people, the city of Phoenix has also grown in the last 5 years, while our number of vacant positions has grown as well. And other factors have come into play, officer retirements, as well as firings, demotions, dismissals, and those kinds of things. We've had, like I said, over 400 vacancies, and these things have really played havoc with our response times. After we determined what the problem was, the Calls to Service Committee developed a list of stakeholders. The major stakeholders are listed here before you. Obviously, the division chief or the assistant chief of police who's in charge of patrol, the Black Mountain Precinct commander who also has a large stake in this entire project and the success of the project, as well as the second shift duty lieutenant who is technically the acting precinct commander when the day shift precinct commander is not there. We also enlisted the help of 6 officers to be on our committee for the Calls to Service Committee. As a result of them being on the committee, we're hoping to gain buy-in from the rank and file officers who are in the precinct, as well as to develop insight into the issue with calls to service and the lengthy response times for priority traffic. We knew that we'd be talking to all of you right now, all the commanders and assistant chiefs in the administrative staff meetings, and as such, that's why we're presenting to you here now. We also understand the chief of police has the ultimate say, and he is the ultimate stakeholder in all of this, as well as his response to the city council, who ultimately signs the checks for everything that we do in the city. We also identified my supervisor as the person who authorized the Calls of Service Committee to be organized and for us to start the project off and come to you today. The officers in the Black Mountain Precinct ultimately will be the ones who respond to traffic and are the ones that are going to be responsible for lowering response times. So they obviously are large stakeholders, as well as the community and the community block watch leaders in the Black Mountain Precinct. They are very helpful with us. We have officers who attend block watch meetings with the main activists within the community, and they help disseminate information at their block watch meetings to the rest of the public. So we consider them major stakeholders as well. The solution that we came up with after much consternation, hand-wringing, and going over all of the data that we could to determine what possible outcomes would benefit the police department the most and give us the most bang for the buck. And what we came up with was an idea for a new detail to be formed to take reports over the phone. We've talked with other agencies such as Los Angeles Police Department and Irvine, California, the Department of Public Safety, as well as the California Highway Patrol, all have some sort of new detail, and by new I mean within the last 5 years, that's been created to take reports over the phone. These over the phone reports are most of the time going to be all priority 3 calls. In other words, our least priority calls to service, and that don't have any actual immediate need for an officer to be there. In other words, there's no emergency response necessary. There's no bad guy there. And there's no likelihood of follow-up. In other words, if it's a type of a criminal damage where somebody threw a rock through a window and we have no idea who did it, there's no way to develop any kind of evidence from that scene, and there's not really any likelihood of follow-up, then reports of that manner, that type of report, could actually be taken over the phone and all the information documented. Also, reports that citizens call in and ask for just a report for information purposes that can in turn into their insurance. So an insurance-only report would fall into that category. So part of the solution will be to have our communications operators route these calls directly to the calls to service detail or the on-call detail by bypassing our dispatchers and preventing these calls from even getting dispatched to patrol officers. So in this manner, it'll free up the officers to have more available time to respond to priority 1 calls to service. And as a result of that, we're hoping that we'll get enough of a reduced workload to decrease the amount of time it takes them to get to priority 1 calls to service. Now, the rollout for the timeline to implement our plan and develop our detail is actually pretty rapid. We have other details that we currently have in process right now, and we have enough staff currently with just light duty and reserves to start our program for just 1 precinct. So we can take all of our light duty officers and our volunteer or reserve officers and train them initially during a 1-month period, because they're already trained in how to take police reports. They already know the process. They know how to complete a police report. So all they'll do is just sit at a desk and answer the phone when the dispatcher sends priority 3 traffic to them, and take the report over the phone. It's a very simple process. It should be a very short learning curve, and the officers should already know how to do what we're asking them to do. It'll just be the experience of entering the report from talking to someone over the phone rather than be there live. During the first and second month of implementation, the communication staff will be the second rung on the ladder. They'll be the people that we contact next to implement our plan. So we'll get a hold of the communications staff, and the on-call officers will be trained in what constitutes a report that can be taken over the phone, as well as what calls can't be taken. So patrol officers in the Black Mountain Precinct will also be trained at the same time in the same subject matter, with a supervisory-only training to ensure that we're complying with the rules of the program. So in other words, supervisors, when we have calls to service that are out, that are being dispatched, that could actually be sent to the on-call officer program, they can actually call the dispatcher and say, hey, can you take that call back and send it to the program? The program will then be rolled out to the operators and dispatchers in the beginning of month 3. So calls at the 3-month period, at the 3-month period, calls will then start being directed to the on-call detail at the discretion of the dispatchers and operators for 911 and Crime Stop. So once they roll the program out, officers will begin getting briefing training from our 6 officers who are already up to speed on the program that were involved in the Calls to Service Committee. And that briefing training will basically just be describing to them what the system is going to be. There really is no involvement for the officers on the street. Nothing will change for them, and there's nothing that they need to do any different other than just respond to traffic. Our initial implementation in the timeline will basically be that officers will respond to all traffic they're dispatched for, even if it's a priority 3 call that the dispatcher through error or personal decision decides that should be sent out. The officers will just take any call they're dispatched to. So in month 4, additional training will be rolled out for everyone in a video format online through the department internet video site, and all officers will be required to review the refresher video as well as all the precinct supervisors. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone in the Black Mountain precinct. And then at the 6-month point, we'll do an evaluation. At the 6-month milestone, we'll look at our implementation of the program and evaluate where we are in calls to service and determine the viability to adapt the program, department-wide. And at that point, we should have a real good handle on knowing what our response times are now and have they changed or improved based on what they were at the beginning of the program. And our goal is to get down below 5 minutes. I think we can actually improve that quite a bit by reducing all the superfluous report calls that are coming into our officers and tying them up for minutes at a time. If we can free them up from those calls that are a very low priority, and those calls can be taken over the phone, we can actually improve our response times a great deal. And I think it's a very cost-effective way of increasing productivity for the officers. And I think the cost of the program would be very small compared to the amount of improvement in our activity at the end of the day. So in order to implement our plan, initially what I developed was to first present our program to department staff. After speaking with my supervisor and the commander in the Black Mountain Precinct, we all felt that this would be the best plan of action to go directly to department staff so that everyone in upper management knows exactly the plan of action, what we want to do, and we can determine whether or not it's viable right from the start. So no time is wasted. If we decide to go ahead with the program, we can immediately start developing a calls to service detail and on-call duty detail so that we can get the people in place and ready to start working as soon as possible. So at the department staff meeting where we are right now, as I said, I've unveiled our entire plan, and once we're through here, our plan will then be presented to managers and communications to ensure that all our dispatchers understand the entire program and how it's going to be implemented. One of the reasons we wanted to do this so early in the process was to demonstrate to communications supervisors and to communications operators how important they were to the success of our overall plan. They are, in all honesty, the most important part, and without them, the program doesn't work. So they have to be on board. We have to have total commitment, and we have to have buy-in from communications. So they are going to be our very, the number 2 presentation is going to be to communications with the go-ahead from department staff and from the chief of police. The entire plan, once it's presented to communications and once we've had approval from department staff, we're going to present this in a condensed version for all of the middle level managers and the commander of Black Mountain Precinct. Although he has been in on the plan from its inception and has been involved in the calls to service committee heavily, I think it's important for him to see the entire presentation and to understand what we're doing from the ground up. And lastly, the officers will be receiving briefing training on the new process. Even though they're not really affected and they still respond to all calls they're dispatched to, we want them to know what the program entails and understand that they, even though they're not part of the calls to service committee, that the success of the program still depends on them focusing their newly found free time on answering calls to priority calls to service. So that's a major issue, and that's one that needs to be addressed. And now that the presentation's over, I'll open everything up to questions. So if I have questions from anybody, we can go over them now.